So the goal of nonviolence is reconciliation. It could be reconciliation of a power disparity. It could be reconciliation of opposing views. It could be reconciliation of a value conflict. But what it's not about is no matter what you say, you're freaking wrong. Even if you apologize to me, that's just more evidence that you're wrong. It's not about that. And that is very often when we get into conflict, we see it in our wider society all the time. We see it in politics all the time, just beating on people. And even when they agree to work with us on something, still hammering at them, right? So welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And today is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday as we do this episode. You're probably listening to it later on. But in honor of Martin Luther King Jr., who I am a huge, huge fan of, we're going to talk about his 6 principles for nonviolent change. And these 6 principles have direct application to any kind of conflict. Like if you are in a marriage and you're fighting all the time, these principles have application. If you're getting divorced and you're trying to figure out how to move through it, these principles have even more application. If you're having trouble at work, these principles have application. So listen up, because this is really good stuff. All right, so the 6 principles, we're going to go over them in detail, but the quick version is, number 1, nonviolence is not for the faint of heart. Number 2, nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. Number 3, the goal of nonviolence is reconciliation. Number 4, redemptive suffering holds transformational power. That sounds like not so good, but there's a lot of power in it. Number 5, nonviolence pertains to physical acts and internal thoughts. That's about us. And number 6, the universe is on the side of justice. All right, so let's start with numero uno. Nonviolence is not for the faint of heart. What does that mean? What it means is if we're in a conflict with our partner, or we're getting divorced, or at work, or our neighbor, if we're in some kind of conflict naturally drives us to have fear, anger. We will naturally be looking for danger. Our amygdala is going to be triggered. It's going to be active. And in order to go on that nonviolent path, we're going to need to make a decision, and not just make a decision, but we need to be willing to stick to that decision. What I mean by sticking to that decision is if we suddenly are in some kind of negotiation with them and experience rage, we're going to need to stick with our decision to be nonviolent. Or if they go off on us and we feel triggered and feel afraid and want to run away, we're going to need to stick with our decision. That's what it means. It's not for the faint of heart. Faint of heart would be people who are conflict avoidant, or people who love to get into conflict very energetically. And what Martin Luther King Jr. was promoting was to confront conflict with a different spirit, right? And this is at the heart of this is creative conflict resolution, particularly when people have been positioned for a long time, which is really not unusual in relationships. So if you've got something going on with another person, the decision you're going to want to make is, I'm not going to engage in violent emotion, right? It's unlikely that you've been punching and hitting each other, though that does happen. What we're talking about here is violent emotion. A violent emotion would be rage, anger, blame, all that really good stuff, that juicy stuff that makes us go from 0 to 60. All right, we're going to make a decision and we're going to stick to it. And part of that decision is going to be, maybe we're going to engage in practices that are going to help us to stay with that decision. And it's proven that mindfulness, meditation, and prayer are ideal tools for managing violent emotion. A really simple prayer that you can use is taken from 12-step programs. It's the Serenity Prayer. And the serenity prayer is God. So you don't have to say God. You could just say, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So in the face of somebody else's violent emotion, you might say, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, their violent emotion, courage to change the things I can, my own reaction to that violent emotion, and the wisdom to know the difference. And what happens when we enter into mindfulness meditation or prayer is it brings us to a more rational part of our brain. You know, when there's violent emotion is displayed, it tends to trigger our amygdala, which is our not a thinking brain, it's a reactive brain. It's fight, flight, or play dead, basically. So practicing meditation or prayer or mindfulness, those are things that are going to help you to stick with that decision that you're going to engage in nonviolence, either emotionally or physically. All right, numero two, numero dos, is nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. And the basic principle here is what we are confronting when we're in a conflict with another person is a breach of justice or values being out of sync. It's not about who they are. But a better way, God, my mouth is not working today. A better way to put this would be principles over personalities. If somebody is saying something to us that we just don't agree with, or that doesn't make sense to us, that doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't make them stupid, or it doesn't make them smarter than us either. It doesn't make them a good person or us a bad person. It just means that we have our values are out of alignment for some reason. And so nonviolence, when we make a decision to be nonviolent, we're also making a decision that we're going to reserve judgment of others. We're going to focus instead on what are the central issues that both people are talking about. We're going to take the me and the we out of it and look at what is the area of dispute if we were going to think about it rationally, right? And that's sort of step two of making the decision, is staying in this place of caring, calm, rational thought. Okay, step three. The goal of nonviolence is reconciliation. What does that mean for us here? Well, I can tell you a lot of the couples that I work with, the problems they come to me with are about both people want to win so badly, they don't actually want to reconcile. They come to me and they both have a position. They've made a judgment about one another's position. They've decided that they're right and the other person's wrong. And a lot of times what they want is they want me to straighten the other person out. In fact, I've had couples who did not complete the process with me because one partner was in a position of greater power than the other and was disappointed in my ability to straighten that person out. And because that person was in a greater power, they pushed and leveraged to end the process rather than have that power, the disparity in power be resolved, or to reconcile their differences. So the goal of nonviolence is reconciliation. It could be reconciliation of a power disparity. It could be reconciliation of opposing views. It could be reconciliation of a value conflict. But what it's not about is it's not about, no matter what you say, you're freaking wrong. Even if you apologize to me, that's just more evidence that you're wrong. It's not about that. And that is very often when we get into conflict, we see it in our wider society all the time. We see it in politics all the time, just beating on people and beating on people. And even when they agree to work with us on something, still hammering at them, right? So when we approach conflict with a spirit of reconciliation, we are approaching it with a willingness to see the other person's point of view, to experience the other person's point of view, and to share ours in a non-judgmental way. All right, let's move on to number 4. This is really a tough one for a lot of people. Redemptive suffering holds transformational power, right? Who wants to suffer? Not me. I think nobody wants to suffer. And at the same time, if somebody else in our presence is explosive or derisive of us, if they've taken a position and they're angry and maybe they're not following these principles of nonviolence, which is not unusual, right? If one person lives by these principles, the other one doesn't. What does that mean? It means that we have a choice either of engaging on their level or, in essence, turning the other cheek. And so suffering in this context does not mean that the other person gets to torture us endlessly, to wail on us, to beat on us. It doesn't mean that. What it means is that when assaulted by other people's emotional violence, we deflect it to the best of our ability, which is a form of suffering, actually. Many people are triggered by emotional violence, and rightly so. The suffering is actually in managing our own triggers and putting our best foot forward regardless. The suffering is if when they throw out a barb or an insult, which is not unusual, that we choose to not be triggered, that we choose to, a part of us is gonna, when somebody throws a barb or an insult at you, a part of you wants to jump in and straighten them out. That's not true. That's not who I am. How could you say that about me? So redemptive suffering is about being the bigger woman or the bigger man and just knowing, you know what? That barb isn't who I am. That isn't about me. The world is a mirror. If you're seeing that in me, there's something about that you're seeing in yourself. It's about operating on a higher plane intellectually and emotionally. And in doing that, we transform the energy in that moment by not engaging in criticism, by not engaging in destructive banter, by not engaging in emotional and violence. We hold the space for transformation and change. There's, number one, transformation in us, because we can grow above the part of us that's reactive and live in a part of us that's win-win. So just get that all of those spaces exist at the same time. It's not that we're not having a reaction. We may have a very powerful reaction, but we're living with our eyes on where we want to be. Where we want to be is to live in equanimity with the other person. And we know that by engaging in violence, in violent emotion, in arguing on this way, that we're not going to have that. And so a part of us suffers the barbs and slings of ill repute from others in holding a transformational space, a space where, having done that, and they see that we are not reactive, that maybe they can step up too, that they can emotionally move to higher space. They can emotionally move to the space where change happens. All right, principle 5, nonviolence pertains to physical acts and internal thoughts. So the point of this is kind of where in the beginning, I was talking about couples. Hopefully we're not wailing at each other. Nonviolence is not just about, I'm not going to go out and burn the flag. I'm not going to go out and break windows. I'm not going to get into a fight and yell and scream at the person on the other side. It's also about what's happening on the inside. And that's sort of that came out of how did we show up in that redemptive suffering? Because on the inside, we're doing the heavy lifting. On the inside, we're doing the work. On the inside, we're choosing where we're going to hang out emotionally. On one level, we may feel like a victim when people are angry in our presence. On another level, we may be angry in response to them, which feels more empowering. On another level, we may be looking for ways that we can take their anger and turn it into a win for us. On the next level up, We may feel terrible for them, that they're in so much pain and that they're angry and want to help them. The level above that, we want not only for us to win, but for them to win. So we're looking for a way through that. On the level above that, we feel personally connected to them and everyone around us in some way. And on the uppermost level, we are creative. We're taking all of our emotions and everything we're experiencing on those other 6 levels, and we're creating something new. We're taking our passion and creating something new. So that's what internal thinking is about. It's about, where am I hanging out? Am I hanging out in, victimization, anger, manipulation, rescuing the other person, win-win, connection to everyone, or passion and creativity? Yamara tapping all of that at once, and we get to choose. That's the thing, is when we make a decision that we're going to engage in nonviolence, in any kind of disagreement, in any kind of conflict, we get to choose. It's personally empowering. And here's the last piece. The universe is on the side of justice. What does that mean? That sounds very woo-woo. Martin Luther King Jr. very much believed that what goes around comes around, that it's not our job to make other people pay. But that doesn't mean that we don't ask for money when we've loaned people money. It means that when somebody's committed a wrong of some kind, that it's not our job to punish them. It's not our job to be the police. It's not our job, unless you are the police or you are a judge, to make them pay. We are going to trust that what goes around comes around. We're going to trust that what people put out, they get back. We're going to trust in the inherent balance of the universe. Or if you'd like, we're going to trust that God is the ultimate arbiter of justice, and that God will make sure that in the end, everyone is judged and everyone pays for what they put out or what they take. It's a faith and confidence that we don't have to. And there's something very liberating about that, right? Because in that, it's much easier to forgive someone if we're not worried about being right or wrong. It's much easier to forgive someone if we're not all wrapped up in fixing them. It's much easier to forgive someone if we're not worried about when are they going to get theirs. And forgiveness is a huge piece of creating reconciliation and resolution in a nonviolent way. We need to forgive them for their violent emotion. We need to forgive them for their missteps in the same way that we forgive ourselves, right? And the truth is, we can't receive grace, we can't receive forgiveness if we don't know how to give it. And that's kind of the basis of the universe is on the side of justice. So there were also, I'm just going to throw this in at the last minute. There were also, Martin Luther King Jr. had 6 steps to bring nonviolent change into fruition in your life. 6 basic steps, and we're not going to go in depth in them, but I'm going to give them to you. This is like your added bonus. Your added bonus is step 1, gather information. So gathering information is you want to understand as much as possible about what the problem is, what the other person sees the problem is, what you see the problem as being, what the society sees the problem as being, what's the environment. Number 2, you want to educate. So educating others is not, by the way, it is not about saying to them, you idiot, this is how it is. It's about making sure that that you all share the same information. Number 3, you want to remain committed. Number 4, you want to peacefully negotiate. So that means you're going to use humor, you're going to use grace, you're going to use intelligence to foster solutions between yourself and the other person. You're going to take action peacefully. You're going to rely on the gentlest way of making your point of view evident. And last of all, you're going to reconcile. And reconciliation is about seeing eye to eye. It's about a give and take. It's about coming to agreement about values and how you're going to enact them and live them together. All right, so that's the 6 principles of nonviolence as applied to relationships. I can tell you that I've coached people who were divorcing or in child disputes with their other partner, and the other partner was very angry for one reason. Maybe they are narcissistic, maybe they're alcoholic, or maybe they're raging. I'll tell you a story, actually. There was a client of mine who I'm going to call Wendy. I've talked about Wendy before. And Wendy was very much afraid for herself and her son. And her husband, Mark, was incredibly angry and abusive and manipulative. Wendy at one point realized that it was even dangerous for their son, for her and Mark to be together, so that Mark would get so angry. And instead of attacking Mark, having him locked up or whatever, which she might have been within her rights to do if she'd stayed with him, the level of violence might have been to that point. She moved out. She got a very high-paying job. She filed for divorce, and she negotiated divorce with Mark. And she dealt with him in a way, she found common ground with him. She found values that they both shared. It turns out their child was the one thing they could both focus on in different ways. But she found common ground with him by using these principles. She did not tell him the judgments she had about him. She set them aside. Instead, she explored commonalities and looked for a way that the two of them could co-parent this child in a way that felt safe for her around the child. And so she had a very careful schedule set up with Mark, and she educated their child about how to deal with people who might have problems like anger, who might have problems like dishonesty, who might have problems like narcissism, without ever outing Mark to their child. Right? This was like super high level, and this is like direct application of these 6 principles we were just talking about. You know, she made a decision, right? She was not faint of heart. She made a decision. She wanted to end the negative interactions that she was having with Mark for the sake of their child, even though he was often the one who was initiating it. Rather than blame him, she just removed herself from the algorithm. Number 3, she reconciled with him as best she could. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Reconciliation does not mean that you're in perfect agreement. It means that you have an understanding of how you're going to move forward. She suffered redemptive suffering. She suffered every time that their child came home and would act like Mark. She would call me, and we would do a session together and talk about how could she go on knowing that the child was going to act like Mark at times. And I reassured her that as long as she was authentic and caring, that the child would always choose her way over Mark's way in the end, and he did. She managed her own internal thinking and acts. She, all very well, like nonviolence pertains to physical acts and internal thoughts. She was very careful about what she said and what she did, even when her thoughts were not in alignment with what reconciliation would look like. And she trusted that Mark would get his own, and she made it work. She is making it work with Mark and with their child to this day. So proud of Wendy. All right. That's all we have today, but take those principles and work them. The reason why they work is they're time tested and they're true, and they work in any context. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, you can, wherever this is posted, you can comment on it, or you can pose the question, or you can reach out to me at rich@richinrelationship.com. I look forward to hearing from you.